Welcome to this YSL Excel VBA tutorial. In this part of our series on writing SQL for Excel files, we're going to look at how to construct full outer joins. We'll begin with a quick recap of inner and left and right outer joins, and then explain how to use a union query to combine the results of a left and a right join into a simulation of a full outer join. We'll explain how to use union all to include duplicated rows, and then show you the basic pattern you need to follow whenever you want to append extra tables to the full outer join query. So let's get started. If you've been watching previous parts of this series, you'll be familiar enough with the basic setup by now, so feel free to skip ahead to the next chapter of the video where we'll get started with writing the queries. If you haven't seen previous parts of this series, here's a quick overview of how things work. We have a macro-enabled workbook called Full Outer Joins, and there's some code in here which allows us to run a query by clicking on this button, which will extract data from a separate Excel file called Movies. The Movies workbook contains information about films and related data on various different worksheets, and we'll be joining together a few of these sheets in the video. I'll keep the Movies workbook open for the duration of the video just to point out things as we go along, but feel free to close down the Movies workbook, all the code will still work. I have both these files stored in the same folder, and I'll drop a link in the video description so that you can download these and follow along with writing the code with me if you'd like to. The code that's in the Full Outer Joins workbook relies on Microsoft ActiveX data objects, which isn't something we're going to talk about in this video. This playlist is designed to focus on the SQL side of things, but if you are interested in ActiveX data objects and how to create connections to other workbooks, we do have a separate playlist which covers that, and I recommend starting with this video here, How Do I Get Data from a Closed Excel File Using VBA. Just to show you the basics of the code working, if we head back to the Full Outer Joins workbook, clicking on the Run Query button triggers a subroutine called Create SQL Query, and the job of this subroutine is simply to construct the string which represents our SQL query. So I've already written a very basic one here which joins the film table to the country table in the Movies workbook. Once we've constructed that string, it then gets passed into a separate subroutine, and this is the one which deals with all of the complicated stuff such as connecting to the Movies workbook, generating the record set. Our query gets used at this part here to set the source property of the record set object, and the rest of the code just writes that data out into a new worksheet in the Full Outer Joins workbook. So just to give that a quick test, if we head back to the menu sheet, click the Run Query button, we'll get a list of results containing all of the film titles with the name of the country in which the film was made. The query we've just executed uses an inner join to combine the rows in the film table with the rows in the country table. If we head back to the Visual Basic editor, we can see how we've constructed that join. So in the From clause of our query, we've referred to the film table first, followed by the phrase inner join, then the reference to the country table. And we've also said that these two tables should be joined on the condition that the country ID in the film table has a value that's equal to the country ID in the country table. The number of rows that we've returned is 1203. But that doesn't necessarily match the number of rows in the film sheet in the Movies workbook. In fact, if we just head back to that workbook and scroll down to the bottom of the film sheet quickly, we can see there's actually 1205 rows, excluding the column headers. An inner join always returns rows where there is a matching value in the joined fields. So this must mean that there are two films in our list which don't have a matching country ID for any row in the country table. What if we wanted to make sure we always see all of the films from the film sheet, regardless of whether it has a matching country ID? To do that, we can change the type of join we're using. If we imagine our joins as a set of overlapping circles like in a Venn diagram, an inner join looks a little like this. So the blue circle on the left represents all of the rows in the film table, the orange circle on the right represents all of the countries in the country table, and the overlapping or inner portion of those two circles represents all of the rows with a matching value in the joined fields. We want to change our inner join, in this case, into a left outer join. We're using a left join simply because we've referred to the film table first, so the film table is on the left of the join that we're writing. So, to make that work and include all of the films in our results, we can head back to the Visual Basic editor, and we can change the word inner to either the word left, which I'll spell correctly, there we go, and you can also optionally add the word outer. As there's no such thing as a left inner join, the word outer is optional here. So having done that, we could head back to the menu sheet and we can click on our Run Query button, And we'll see this time, if we switch back briefly to the Visual Basic Editor, we have returned 1,205 rows. And if we head back to our list of results, head to the top of the country column, tap Control and the down arrow key, we'll stop above the first film, which doesn't have a country assigned to it. And we can head down again using the same keyboard shortcut to find the next film with the unmatched country. Now, it may also be possible that in our set of results in the country table, there are countries which don't have any films. And in fact, there are lots of them in this particular database. If we head to the country worksheet in the movies workbook, we've got a list of countries which have made films or have films released in them in our database. But we've also got a long list of countries which do not have any films made in them, or at least not in this database, I should clarify. So if we wanted to see all of the rows from the country table, regardless of whether there is a film made in that country, again, we can think about changing our type of join. Rather than using a left outer join this time, we can use a right outer join. So the country table is on the right of our join. So to get all of the rows from the country table, we need to use a right join or right outer join. And again, it is as simple as changing our join code to say right or right outer join. And once we've done that, we can head back to the menu sheet, run that query again, and this time we'll get a list of all of the films with countries where they have them. And then if we scroll down to the bottom of that list, we'll also see a list of all of the countries in which no films have been made. So the number of results this time is a little different. If we switch back to the Visual Basic Editor, we've got 1,387 rows. So we can use a left join to make sure we see all of the rows from the film table, regardless of whether the film has a matching country. And we can use a right outer join to show all of the countries from the country table, regardless of whether they have been assigned to any films. But what if we wanted to see both sets of results in the same query? If we were writing our code in a slightly different dialect of SQL, we could use something called a full outer join or a full join, and that would return every possible combination of results, all the 1,205 rows from the film table and all of the rows from the country table as well. But the version of SQL that we're writing with the ASOLADB provider doesn't support the full join syntax, so we have to be a little more clever about things. What we're going to do is take the left outer join results and then union those to the right outer join results to get the combination of both sets of data. So to do that, let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor. And I think the simplest thing to do here at this point is just to make a copy of the entire select statement and then add a continuation character to the end of the previous line, head down a line and then paste in what we've just copied. Now we want one left join and one right join, so I'm going to change the first join to a left outer join. And then in front of the word select in the second select statement, I'm going to write the word union. We've covered union queries in previous videos in this playlist, so I'm not going to explain too much more about them right now. But union queries, rather than a join which essentially puts tables side by side, a union arranges tables top to bottom, so one above the other. So we'll get the full list of results from the left join, followed by the full set of results from the right join. The union keyword here will automatically remove duplicates, so technically we would be returning, if we have a look back at our overlapping circles, both the right outer join and the left outer join return the inner portion of our results, but because a union keyword automatically removes duplicates, we'll only see one copy of the inner portion. So having done that, if we head back to the menu sheet and we run our query again, we'll see a list that consists of all of the countries with no films made in them. We'll also then see all of the films and the countries in which the film was made. And then somewhere in that list, in fact the easiest way to find it would I suspect be to click somewhere in the country column, hold down the control key and tap the down arrow key, and then we'll find somewhere in here the films with no countries assigned. So there we go, we've got the full combination of all of the results, simulating what a full outer join would do. Now there is one other consequence of having used a union query here. I said that the union query automatically removes duplicates, and that's quite a handy thing to do in this example because it means we don't see two copies of the inner portion of our join. But in our film database there are some films which have been remade, so the same film title appears multiple times, and often those films have been remade in the same country, so there are duplicates of the film title and country combination, and our union query will remove those as well. So that means that the number of results we see isn't necessarily what we would expect if we head back to the Visual Basic editor. In the previous query, when we extracted or selected all of the countries along with any matching films, we got 1,387 rows. That was from the right outer join portion. And we know that there are 2 additional films which do not have a valid country, so in total there should be 1,389 results. But when we use the union query, we get 1,362. So it's removed a lot of duplicated film names and country name combinations. If we wanted to make sure we saw every single film, even if it was a duplicate or a remake, we would need to include in our select list something which makes each row unique. So for example, we could include the release date of the film or the film ID. Just to demonstrate that that's the case, let's include in each of these select lists the film's release date. It's highly unlikely that a remake occurred on exactly the same date, so I think we should be fairly safe including the release date. If you're not sure that the date would be sufficient, then the film ID is probably a better choice. The film ID is supposed to be unique in the table, so that would guarantee that every row would then be unique. So having done that, let's head back to the menu sheet, and if we run that query again, and then this time have a look at the number of results we've returned, this time we do get the expected number of 1,389. So that technique works okay. It means we get the expected number of results now at least. But it does mean that we had to include that extra column in our result set. What if we didn't want that extra column, or what if we didn't have a column like that available, but we still wanted to see the same number of rows? In order to do that, we've got a little more work to do. So let's get rid of the film release date column first of all from each of the select statements. Then rather than using the union keyword, we can use a union all select statement. So union all will include every single row, even if it's duplicated. Now you might be able to spot the obvious problem with what's going to happen when we run this query. If we're going to include every single row, then we're going to get every possible combination of left and right outer joins. So the number of results we get is 2,592. So we're including the inner portion of our 2 joins twice in the query results. Now ideally, I'd like to include that set of results only once. So to make that work, we've got a little more work to do. What we could do is exclude the inner portion of the results for one of the 2 queries in our combination. So we want to get, let's say, the left outer join including the inner portion for the first half, and then for the second half only the countries which do not have any films. So we want to get the unmatched rows from the country table. To do that, we still need to use a right join to get everything from the country table, but then we can add a where clause to exclude the inner portion. So to make that work, we can head back to the Visual Basic editor, and then at the end of the query we can add a where clause. So this is going to apply only to the second select statement. So we can say where, and then concatenate the condition f.filmid is null. So what we're trying to do here, what we're trying to test for, is any row where the film has no value. It didn't really matter which column from the film table we picked here. If a country has no film, any of the film columns will contain null. So having done that, if we now run that query one more time, we should see that we get, once again, the expected number of results, 1,389. So from this point on, including extra tables and columns is reasonably straightforward. We can follow the same sort of pattern. Let's say we wanted to include a column which showed the studio which released each film. So I'd want to make sure that I show all of the films even if we don't have a valid studio assigned to them, and then after that add all the studios which don't have any films. So let's deal with including the studio column in the main list of results first of all. I don't want to affect the number of results here. We should still see 1,389 rows. So we can start by copying our left outer join line, which joins the country table to the film table, and then paste that in just below. If you've watched the previous videos in the playlist, you'll know that you then need to enclose the previous joins in a set of round brackets. And then we can start modifying the copied join, so we can say studio rather than country. And I'll give this a different alias. I'll call it S, joining on the studio ID. Try that again, joining on the studio ID to the studio ID. I can then include in my select list a reference to the column I want to see, which will be s.studio, and then make sure that we can concatenate that with a continuation character. And then because we're using a union query, one of the rules of unions is that the number of columns in each select statement must match. So I want to include an extra column in my second select list. I don't really want it to hold a value though, so I can just open up some double quotes and then type in a comma, and I could enter an empty string just by entering single quotes, or I could pass in the value of null. Close the double quotes and then concatenate a continuation character to the end. Okay, so the aim here is that we shouldn't have affected the number of results. We should still get 1,389. We'll just get an extra column showing the name of the studio for those films which have a valid studio. So we can head back to the menu sheet and we can run that query, and we will see a list of films with their countries and studios. And if we look back at the Visual Basic Editor, we should still have returned 1,389 rows. Next, I'd like to append to the end of our current set of results the list of studios with no corresponding films. And we can do that using the basic same technique we've used to bring in the list of countries which have no films made in them. Now ideally I'd like to have this written as one single continuous select statement, but I think I'm going to run into a problem here. If I try to copy and paste my union all select statement and paste that in at the end, I run into the too many line continuations problem. There's a limit of 25 continuations you can include in one single statement in VBA. So we have a couple of choices to fix this. We could start combining multiple lines into a single line in our VBA code, but I find that makes our select statements a little difficult to read. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to break my concatenation into several separate stages. So I'm just taking away the continuation characters at the end of the first select statement, just before the union all select, and then at the top of that I'm going to type in SQL query equals SQL query, and then concatenate that to the next bit of text. So we're still building up the same string, it's just going to be done in separate stages. So now that I've done that, I'm going to copy and paste that combination, paste that in again. And then of course we'll need to change the joins and the columns we're selecting. So I'm not trying to join the country table to the film table. I want to join the studio table to the film table. So I'm just going to copy and overwrite the existing join in that copied query to refer to the studio table instead. I then want to make sure that I'm referring to the studio name, so rather than the country, I'm going to change that. I'm going to change the null to say s.studio. So I want the studio name in the same column that the studio name will appear in my previous two select statements. But of course I don't have access to the country field in this particular query, so I can replace that again either with an empty string or with a null value. And I'm going to go with a null again to be consistent. Okay, so having done that, we could head back to the menu sheet and then run the query again. And this time we will see a list including more than the 1,389 we returned last time. We'll have an additional list of apparently 12 studios which don't have any films made in them. So at this point we could carry on following exactly that same pattern to bring in as many additional tables as we like and guarantee that we always see all of the rows from every table involved in the query. So there you go, there's the basics of simulating full outer joins using combinations of left and right outer joins in SQL for Excel files. Hope you found that one useful. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.